I remember the message appearing on my screen like an accusation carved in stone. Traitor. Family comes first. I can't believe you'd abandon us like this. My brother Matt's words landed with the weight of judgment, each syllable sharp as cut glass. I sat alone in my apartment that evening, watching my phone light up with his fury, once, twice, 3 times, until the screen went dark again. The silence between notifications felt heavier than the messages themselves. Outside my window, the city hummed with Friday night energy, people rushing toward weekend plans, connections, possibilities. Plans I once had too, before canceling them became my reflex, my expectation, my unspoken duty. All because I had finally said no to watching his children. After months, no, years of being treated like a resource rather than a person, I had declined a last-minute request to babysit for the entire weekend. And now, apparently, I was a traitor. I closed my eyes and felt the strange, hollow space that opens inside your chest when someone you love reveals how little they understand you. The apartment around me was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on my kitchen wall and the distant sound of traffic 17 floors below. My home. This modest space I had built for myself, painted in colors I chose, filled with books I wanted to read someday when I found the time. Time that had been slipping through my fingers like water for as long as I could remember. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap, palms up, empty. 36 years of life, and what had I gathered for myself? What seeds had I planted in my own garden while I was so busy tending to everyone else's? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, while my phone continued its angry dance across the coffee table. Reliability had been sewn into the fabric of my identity for as long as I could remember. Even as children, Matt would break the rules while I kept them. Matt would forget his homework while I remembered mine. Matt would make messes while I cleaned them up. We carried these roles into adulthood like inherited traits, unchangeable as eye color or the sound of our laughs. When he married Lily 10 years ago, I stood beside them at their wedding, smiling in a dress I didn't choose, hair styled in a way that made me look more mature, because someone needed to appear responsible in the family photos. By then, it was already understood that I would be their safety net, their backup plan, their break glass in case of emergency option that somehow became their first call, every time. I never resented my nieces for it. Emma and Sophie, now 8 and 6, with their father's easy laugh and their mother's thoughtful eyes. I loved them with a fierceness that surprised even me. But somewhere along the way, my love for them had been leveraged into an obligation that consumed my life in small, daily increments. The pattern had established itself so gradually that I hardly noticed its weight until it was crushing me. It started with occasional afternoon pickups from school when Matt or Lily couldn't make it in time. Then came the evening babysitting when they had work functions. Then the weekend favors when they needed a break. Then the midnight phone calls when one of the girls was sick and Lily was too exhausted to function after her double shifts at the hospital. I canceled dates to help them. I used vacation days when their childcare fell through. I drove across town in snowstorms because they knew I would never say no. I rearranged my life around their emergencies until, eventually, my availability wasn't requested. It was presumed. My time wasn't borrowed. It was budgeted into their lives without consultation. The thank yous grew shorter, then perfunctory, then absent entirely. My presence became as expected and unremarkable as the furniture in their home. There were moments, scattered through those years like breadcrumbs marking a path I was too tired to follow, when I felt the wrongness of it settle in my bones. The Christmas when Matt and Lily went to Barbados but couldn't afford a ticket for me, despite my watching their children for 17 consecutive weekends that fall. The promotion I declined because it would have required travel that would make me less available to help with the girls. The man I dated for 8 months who eventually stopped calling after I canceled our anniversary dinner because Sophie had a fever and no one else could possibly handle it, according to my brother. With each sacrifice, I told myself I was being generous. I was being loving. I was being family. But underneath those noble labels, something else was happening, something that felt increasingly like erasure. I was becoming a function rather than a person, a solution rather than a sister, a calculation in someone else's life equation. When I finally said no, it wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no ultimatum, no line drawn in the sand. It was a Thursday evening in late September, the kind where summer's heat still lingers, but fall's melancholy has already begun its quiet invasion. Matt called just as I was leaving work, his voice casual with presumption. "Hey, Lily and I managed to get a last-minute deal on that cabin by the lake this weekend. The one I was telling you about? Anyway, we're heading out tomorrow afternoon, so we'll drop the girls at your place around 4. We'll be back Sunday night, probably late, so maybe they could just sleep over and you can take them to school Monday?" Not, "Can you watch the girls?" Not, "Would you mind?" Not even the pretense of a request. Just the assumption that I would rearrange my weekend. A weekend I had plans for, a writer's workshop I had paid for months in advance, my first real investment in myself in years, to accommodate their spontaneous getaway. And something inside me, some small pilot light of self-preservation that I thought had been extinguished long ago, suddenly flared to life. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid drumming of my heart. "I can't this weekend. I have plans I can't change." The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call had dropped. Then came his confusion, his disbelief, his increasing irritation as he realized I was serious. The conversation ended with him hanging up, and the text messages began 20 minutes later. Traitor. The word lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. That night, I barely slept. Guilt wrapped around me like a familiar blanket, heavy and suffocating. Was I being selfish? Was family not supposed to come first? Had I broken some sacred covenant by finally acknowledging my own needs? I watched the ceiling fan rotate above my bed, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls, and questioned everything I thought I knew about obligation and love. The morning brought no clarity, only Matt's continued silence and the knowledge that somewhere across town, he and Lily were scrambling to find alternative childcare for their weekend away. Part of me wanted to call back, to apologize, to slide back into the comfortable groove of my assigned role. It would be easier than this uncertainty, this guilt, this strange disorientation of standing up for myself after years of bending to accommodate others. But another part of me, a part growing stronger with each passing hour, recognized that this discomfort was necessary, not just for me, but for all of us. Some patterns need to break before they can heal into something healthier. The aftermath unfolded slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical bath, revealing its true image one detail at a time. Matt and Lily didn't go to the cabin that weekend. I attended my writing workshop, taking notes in a journal I bought specifically for the occasion, trying to ignore how my phone remained silent in my bag. The workshop was held in a converted warehouse space downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, filled with strangers who knew nothing of my family dynamics or the small rebellion I had staged to be there. Right about a moment when you felt truly seen, the instructor told us on the first morning, her silver-streaked hair gathered in a loose knot at the nape of her neck, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. Or perhaps more interestingly, right about a moment when you realized you had been invisible. I remember the pen hesitating above the blank page then, my breath catching as the prompt landed with unexpected precision. Had I ever been truly seen by my family? Had they ever looked at me and recognized the person beneath the function, the woman behind the role I had been assigned? I began to write, hesitantly at first, then with increasing urgency, words flowing from some internal reservoir I hadn't known existed. By the time the instructor called for a break 2 hours later, I had filled 7 pages with a truth I had never fully articulated, even to myself. The family group chat, once filled with daily updates and photos of the girls, grew noticeably cooler toward me. My mother called, her voice careful, to ask if everything was okay between you and your brother. I heard the unspoken judgment behind her question, the assumption that I was the one who needed to make amends. I didn't defend myself. I had spent too many years explaining, justifying, apologizing. Instead, I let the silence grow, fertilizing whatever truth might eventually take root in its soil. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened around me, leaves turning gold and crimson before surrendering to the wind. I learned that Matt had been forced to pay for emergency childcare several weekends in a row, an expense that apparently strained their budget more than they'd anticipated. I heard through my cousin that Lily had picked up extra shifts at the hospital to cover the unexpected costs, leaving Matt to manage the girls' activities and homework alone for the first time in years. Their household, I realized, had been built on the invisible foundation of my free labor, and without it, the structure was revealing its weaknesses. I took no pleasure in their struggles, but I recognized the necessary recalibration taking place. Systems built on inequity eventually face their reckoning. Even family systems. Especially family systems. One evening in early November, my phone lit up with Lily's name. "Please," her message read. "Just for a few weekends? It's killing us." My finger hovered over the screen, the muscle memory of saying yes nearly overriding my newfound resolve. How easy it would be to slip back into old patterns, to silence the discomfort of change with a familiar anesthetic of self-sacrifice. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of the moment pressing against my chest, demanding a choice. Then I set the phone down, unanswered, and walked to my window instead. The city stretched before me, lights blinking in windows where countless other lives were unfolding, countless other choices being made. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and breathed slowly, watching my exhale fog the window, then fade. I was choosing myself, not out of spite or anger or resentment, but out of the simple, radical act of self-preservation. I was choosing to exist as more than an extension of someone else's needs. Thanksgiving arrived with its familiar choreography of food and forced conversation. We gathered at my parents' house, the neutral territory of our childhood home, where old photographs lined the hallways like evidence of people we no longer were. Matt arrived late with Lily and the girls, his expression guarded when he saw me helping in the kitchen. We moved around each other like cautious planets, maintaining our orbits, careful not to collide. The girls ran to hug me, their affection untainted by adult complications, and I held them perhaps a moment longer than necessary, breathing in the scent of their shampoo and the innocent warmth of their small bodies. "Aunt Rachel, why don't you come over anymore?" Sophie asked, her voice carrying in the sudden lull of conversation. I felt the room's attention shift toward us, the question hanging in the air like smoke after a blown-out candle. Before I could formulate an answer that wouldn't fracture the fragile peace of the day, Matt's voice cut through the silence. "Because your aunt has decided she's too busy for us these days," he said, the bitterness in his tone poorly disguised as casualness. "She's got more important things to do than help her family." The words landed in the room like a grenade, and I watched my mother's face fall, my father's shoulders tense, the careful choreography of the day beginning to unravel. The turkey on its serving platter seemed suddenly less impressive, the cranberry sauce less vibrant, the entire performance of family harmony revealed as the fragile construction it had always been. My nieces, sensitive to the shift in atmosphere as children often are, grew quiet and still, their eyes darting between the adults with the wariness of those who have witnessed similar tensions before. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the silence, marking the seconds of discomfort with mechanical precision. Someone, my father, I think, cleared his throat and attempted to redirect the conversation towards safer territory, asking Emma about her recent soccer tournament. But the damage was done, the pleasant facade cracked beyond easy repair. It was Lily's expression that caught and held my attention, confusion, then hurt, then something sharper and more assessing as she looked between her husband and me. "What is he talking about?" she asked later, cornering me in the hallway between the dining room and kitchen as I carried a stack of plates to be washed. "What exactly have we done to you?" The question wasn't accusatory but genuinely perplexed, as if she truly didn't understand the source of the tension. And I realized, in that moment of clarity that sometimes arrives when you least expect it, that perhaps she didn't. Perhaps the story Matt had been telling her was different from the reality I had been living. So I told her, calmly, factually. Standing in my parents' hallway surrounded by photographs of our shared past, I outlined the years of unpaid babysitting, the canceled plans, the missed opportunities, the the gradual transformation of favor into obligation. I described the silent expectations that had never once been reciprocated, the subtle erasure of my own needs and desires, the slow colonization of my time without acknowledgement or gratitude. As I spoke, I noticed a particularly telling photograph on the wall beside us, one taken 3 Christmases ago. In it, everyone was gathered around the tree opening gifts, my parents beaming, Matt and Lily lounging on the couch, the girls tearing through wrapping paper with gleeful abandon. And there I was, slightly blurred in the background, carrying a tray of hot chocolate, looking at everyone else instead of at the camera. Not even fully present in the frame of my own family memory. I paused mid-sentence and gestured toward it. "Look," I said softly. "That's what I'm talking about. I'm always hovering at the edges, making sure everyone else is taken care of. I've been doing it for so long that none of us even notices anymore. Not even me." Lily stared at the photograph for a long moment, then turned back to me. Her expression shifted into something more somber, more understanding. "I see it now," she said, and I believed her. I spoke without drama or accusation, simply laying out the pattern as I had experienced it, year after year. As I talked, I watched her face change, confusion giving way to dawning recognition, then dismay, then something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice small in the quiet hallway. "I thought you offered because you wanted to. Matt always said." She trailed off, but the unfinished sentence hung between us, pregnant with implications neither of us were ready to voice aloud. The days after Thanksgiving unfolded with a strange, electric tension, like the air before a storm. Lily stopped asking me to babysit. The family group chat remained quiet. I threw myself into my work, into the writing practice I had begun at the workshop, into slowly reclaiming the rhythms of a life organized around my own priorities. December arrived with its particular melancholy, the shortened days and holiday lights creating a bittersweet nostalgia that made me both miss my nieces and feel grateful for the boundaries I had finally established. I sent them carefully chosen gifts, books I thought they would love, art supplies I knew they would use for hours, and received polite thank you texts from Lily, but nothing from Matt. The silence between us stretched longer, hardened into something that began to feel permanent. Then, 3 days before Christmas, my cousin Jamie called. "You should know," she said, her voice careful, measured. "Lily's been asking questions. About all the times you helped them. About what Matt told her versus what actually happened." I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic plate of emotion moving beneath the surface of my composure. "What kind of questions?" I asked, watching snow begin to fall outside my window, each flake catching the streetlight before disappearing into the gathering darkness below. "The kind that suggest she's putting together a very different picture than the one she had before," Jamie replied. "I think she's figuring out that you weren't the problem, Rachel. I think she's starting to see who was." The revelation came not as a flood but as a slow, steady drip of truth, seeping into the cracks of our family's foundation. Over the weeks that followed, I learned through various channels, my mother, my cousins, mutual friends, that Lily had been excavating the past, examining the narrative Matt had constructed about my abandonment of their family. She discovered discrepancies that couldn't be explained away, bank withdrawals for emergency childcare on weekends when Matt had told her I simply refused to help, missed deadlines at his job that he had blamed on my unavailability, strained finances that somehow became my responsibility rather than the result of his own choices. She learned that Matt had been painting himself as the victim of my selfishness to hide his own irresponsibility, using me as a convenient explanation for his failures both large and small. Family members who had once whispered against me, who had accepted Matt's version of events without question, now fell awkwardly silent as the full picture emerged. I wasn't the traitor. I was the scapegoat. The realization spread through our extended family like a slow-moving current, changing the landscape one conversation at a time. I took no public victory lap, claimed no vindication. There was no confrontation, no dramatic showdown where Matt was forced to admit his manipulation. Life rarely offers such neat resolutions. Instead, there was simply a gradual rebalancing, a quiet reassessment of roles and responsibilities. Some family members approached me tentatively, offering coffee dates or phone calls that felt like unofficial peace treaties. I had no idea, my Aunt Margaret said one afternoon as we sat in a corner cafe, rain streaming down the windows beside us, blurring the outside world into impressionistic smudges of color and light. We all just assumed. She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. I understood the power of assumption, how it could calcify into perceived truth if left unchallenged long enough. I nodded and stirred my tea, watching the amber liquid swirl into a miniature vortex. It's easy to believe what we're told, I said finally, especially when it fits what we expect to see. She reached across the table then and covered my hand with hers, a gesture of such simple human connection that I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. These small moments of recognition, of being truly seen after years of invisibility, affected me more deeply than any grand apology could have. Lily reached out occasionally with careful, neutral messages, photos of the girls at school events, updates on their activities, small glimpses into their lives offered without expectation or demand. Matt remained distant, his pride perhaps too wounded to bridge the gap between us, but the active hostility faded into a more manageable absence. I missed the girls with an ache that sometimes woke me in the night, but I recognized that healing sometimes requires distance, that relationships occasionally need to break before they can be rebuilt on healthier ground. 6 months after that first refusal, after the text that labeled me traitor, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends and the cousins who had chosen to stay in my life, gathered around my table eating pasta I had made from scratch, drinking wine, laughing about nothing and everything as the spring evening softened into night outside my windows. In the corner of my living room, on a small side table I had recently refinished myself, sat a framed photograph I had taken 2 months earlier on a solo hiking trip to the mountains, my first real vacation in years. In it, I stood alone on a ridge overlooking a valley painted in greens and golds, my face turned toward the camera, smiling with an unguarded joy that had once felt foreign to my features. I looked free. I was free. Matt and Lily were still together, still struggling with the ordinary challenges of work and parenthood and marriage, but with new awareness of the patterns that had nearly broken them. Lily no longer asked me for anything she wasn't willing to pay for, and when she did ask, it was with genuine respect for my right to refuse. The girls still visited occasionally, our relationship slowly rebuilding on foundations of choice rather than obligation. And Matt? We spoke at family gatherings, exchanged perfunctory birthday messages, maintained the outward appearance of siblinghood, without its deeper connections. Perhaps one day we would find our way back to something more authentic, something built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Perhaps not. I had learned to live with that uncertainty, to release my grip on outcomes I couldn't control. What mattered was that I had never had to raise my voice to be heard. I never had to explain myself to be understood. I simply stood in my truth long enough for it to become visible to those willing to see it. The winter of disconnect had given way to a spring of quiet clarity, and now I lived in a summer of unhurried self-discovery. I existed without debt, emotional or otherwise. I reclaimed my time, my energy, my right to prioritize my own needs alongside others. And in doing so, I discovered that true family, true love of any kind, never requires the sacrifice of self-respect. It never demands erasure as proof of loyalty. It expands to include the wholeness of each person, their desires and boundaries and fundamental dignity. This was the lesson written in the pages of my story, not in dramatic confrontations or public reckonings, but in the quiet, consistent choices I made each day to honor my own worth. As my guests laughed around my dinner table that evening, as the candles burned lower and the night grew deeper, I excused myself briefly and stepped out onto my small balcony. The spring air carried the scent of blooming things, of renewal and possibility. 17 floors below, the city pulsed with its endless rhythm of comings and goings, lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to fully comprehend. I leaned against the railing and looked up at the sliver of moon visible between buildings, thinking about cycles, how they end, how they begin again, How sometimes breaking them requires a courage that feels impossible until suddenly, it doesn't. Inside, through the glass door, I could see my friends raising their glasses in some shared joke, their faces illuminated by candlelight, present and alive in a moment that belonged entirely to itself. I would rejoin them in a minute. But first, I wanted to acknowledge this threshold I had crossed, this journey from self-erasure to self-reclamation. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, filling my lungs with night air and gratitude. When I opened them again and returned to my guests, I felt a sense of peace settle over me like a blessing, not the peace of perfect resolution or fairy tale endings, but the more complex, textured peace of having walked through fire and emerged transformed. Not unscathed, not unmarked, but authentic. Whole. Present in my own life, at last. The path forward would continue to have its complications, its moments of doubt and grief for what was lost, but I would walk it on my own terms, at my own pace, guided by my own inner compass rather than someone else's expectations. And that, I had finally learned, was not betrayal. It was the truest form of loyalty, loyalty to the person I was meant to become, the life I was meant to live, the truth I was finally brave enough to claim as my own.